I got distracted on other things as well, but did deal with those. And it turns out a perfectly good ordinary baby barnacle grows up into this strange looking thing when it attaches onto a crab, hermit crab in this particular case. And so rather than saying this thing doesn't have any standard characteristic of an arthropod, much less a crustacean or barnacle, so we'll make a new phylum, you say, well, we'll just call it a really weird barnacle. Another example, deep sea sponge here, and it's got little spicules and things like that. Most features, it looks like a standard ordinary deep sea sponge, but the things feed by trapping small animals that stick on the surface, and they've entirely lost the system of pores that is characteristic for sponges as a whole, hence the phylum Porifera. Another factor that goes into this is fossilization patterns. Fossil record is pretty patchy, so once again, a more inclusive category, better chance you have of finding something that fits into it. General study of this known as taphonomy. There are many factors that affect preservation, what we can tell. But even if you have a poor fossil, you may be able to tell something about, or good, but not what you want. So if you just find some sort of jointed leg like this, you know there were arthropods around. What kind? That much you probably couldn't say what kind, but at least it was an arthropod. Or again, an example, there's a spot in Alabama with lots of footprints from coal age deposits. In fact, there's a coal mine for the site. And you've got these big footprints conspicuously match pelecosaur. We don't have any bones for anything there. We don't know anything about anything but their feet, but they were pelecosaurs. Another factor on fossil record relates to where we find exceptional preservation. These are commonly referred to as Lagerstätten, and those later peaks in appearance of new taxa tend to be associated with them, or in fact, even the Cambrian, we have exceptional preservation. So, for example, there are a couple of examples where we have an insect in amber, and here's this little parasitic worm emerging from it, stuck in there, and that's about the only way you can get a decent fossil of something like that. So until you have amber deposits, you have very poor chance of getting anything like that. And for various reasons in geologic time, at certain points, there are deposits that nicely preserve particular types of things, and we generally see, hey, that's the first known example of this group or another group. Again, fossilization, older you get, the more chance for things to be lost. And so this, again, a bigger category, better chances. Also, ecologically, different environments. A larger category tends to include more things. You get a bird guide for Australia and one for North America. There are about a dozen species in common if you count pigeons and things like that. But at the order level, almost all of them are in both places. We don't have cassowaries here, but most of the orders are in both places. Similarly, snails, usually a family to superfamily, is either freshwater or land or marine, but higher categories you can get more. Another problem with fossilization is sometimes the key feature to recognize something is lousy for fossilization. The key feature to tell a snail from something that's not exactly a snail is whether the body is twisted relative to the head and foot region. And of course, Alice was kind of tongue-in-cheek saying this. We can have a pretty confident idea that if we see something very much like a modern snail, that it had similar anatomy. But when you get back, particularly very early in the fossil record, there are these kind of coiled, decap-shaped things, and being certain whether they were twisted around or not is quite difficult. However, pretty sure that they were mollusks. Now, of course, any of these apply to any origin scenario, but there are some evolutionary considerations as well. From an evolutionary perspective, we expect a higher category to be something that evolved earlier, and so the oldest fossils may have gotten the key feature for, say, phylum or class, but not at a lower level, or they could kind of have a combination if they're transitions. So this is can't say I'm all that artistically skilled, but the basic idea is that this tall cap-shaped shell that's got chambers partitioning off the back end. And this is almost, but not quite, what you need to have a good cephalopod, like a nautilus, squid, octopus type of thing. The one thing that's needed beyond this is to have connections going back in there so the animal can control what's going on back in those chambers. And so we've got a transitional, but it's not quite a cephalopod, but we're sure it's a mollusk. Another factor, evolutionarily, not just home repair, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The key distinguishing features that we use to recognize a lot of these higher categories are things that have fairly pervasive basic effects. Many of them occur quite early in development. And so once something like this is established, probably in general messing with that's not as good an idea as, say, adding something on or tweaking something a little more on the edge. So, for example, in animals, a very important distinction is how the cells divide right at the beginning, and changing that, probably not such a good idea to mess up at that point. Another evolutionary consideration is if there's room for something to evolve or not. As you have more things out there, increasing competition means that probably getting specialized, focusing in on what you're already doing reasonably well is going to be more successful than radically trying out something totally different. Good chance somebody is already good at that. So, for example, right now, we don't expect to see cats evolving into dogs because they'd be competing with dogs that are already good at being dogs, and partly in between ones probably not going to be real successful. If dogs somehow became extinct, or perhaps if we stuck cats somewhere where there are no dogs, then there might be more of an opportunity to evolve in that direction. However, there are some situations, if there's been mass extinction, some sort of new habitat becoming available, or some key innovation occurs, then there's more possibilities. So, for example, some of the latest classes to appear in the fossil record are in the vertebrates, mammals, birds, and this in part probably reflects the fact that vertebrates were able to do well on land, where very few other types of organisms are able to do very well, and so had more opportunity to do something new there than if they were trying to come up with something new in the ocean already full of competitors. Another issue is just how we classify things. There's been a big push over the past few decades to classify things in what's perceived as a good evolutionary way. It's referred to as cladistics. And part of that tends to be a